At 62, I had already come to terms with where I stood, recently retired from my teaching career. I was living in a quiet house, nestled on the outskirts of town, filling my days with gardening and books. My husband had passed 5 years ago, and since then I found comfort in a simple routine, but nothing could have prepared me for the changes that came when my stepson Alex came to live with me. Alex was 22, fresh out of college, with dreams of starting his career as a graphic designer in the city. His father and I had married just 2 years before his passing, and though Alex and I didn't get many chances to bond, back then we had always been cordial. When Alex called me a few months ago, I hadn't heard from him in a while. He said, "Hey, Mara," his voice a bit hesitant. "I know this is kind of sudden, but I need to ask for a favor." I could hear the concern in his voice, and before he even finished, I knew what he was going to ask. He was in between jobs, trying to get his footing in a competitive field, and was struggling with rent. I told him he could stay with me for as long as he needed, until he found a stable job in a place of his own. I remember the day he arrived. I spent the morning cleaning up the guest room, making sure everything was just right. As the hours passed, I found myself getting anxious, something I hadn't felt in years. What would it be like having someone so young living under my roof again? It had been so long since I had shared my space with anyone, let alone a man of his age. When he finally pulled up in his old beat-up car, I stepped outside to greet him. He smiled at me with that same familiar grin I remembered from family gatherings. But something was different now. He wasn't the awkward teenager I had known. Alex had grown into a tall, broad, shouldered young man with a confident air about him. "Hey, Mara," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Welcome," I replied, feeling a bit out of place. I hope the drive wasn't too bad. Nah, it was fine. Thanks for letting me stay here. The first few days were uneventful. Alex spent most of his time in his room, or looking out for jobs. I did my best to stay out of his way, not wanting to be the overbearing stepmother. But there was something different about the house. With him in it, I noticed small things, like the way he would smile at me from across the table, or how he would linger in the kitchen, just a little longer than necessary, chatting with me about his day. It was nice to have someone around. I couldn't deny that. One night a few weeks after he moved, something unexpected happened. I'd gone to bed early, the house quiet as usual. It was probably around midnight when I heard the soft creak of my bedroom door opening. I turned over, barely awake, and saw Alex standing in the doorway. "Alex," I mumbled, confused. "Is everything all right?" He stepped into the room, his figure silhouetted against the dim light coming from the hallway. His face was hard to read in the shadows, but I could tell something was on his mind. I couldn't sleep. He sat quietly walking toward my bed. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly under his weight. "I don't know," he said finally. "I guess I've just been feeling a little lost." There was something in his voice that tugged at my heart. I had always seen Alex as a capable, self-assured young man, but in that moment, he seemed so vulnerable. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand on his arm, offering what little comfort I could. "You're going to be all right," I said softly. "It's just a rough patch. Everyone goes through it at some point." He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, the air between us felt different, thicker. I don't know how else to describe it. I should have pulled away, should have said something to break the tension, but instead I stayed still, my hand lingering on his arm. "Thanks, Mara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. He stood up slowly, his eyes lingering on me for just a second longer, before turning and heading back to his room. As the door clicked shut behind him, I lay back down, my heart racing in my chest. I didn't know what to make of the moment. we had just shared, was it my imagination? Or had something really changed between us? The next morning, everything was back to normal. Alex acted as if nothing had happened, chatting with me over breakfast about his job hunt and weekend plans. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I tried to push it out of my mind, telling myself that I was overthinking it, that I was just lonely and misreading the situation. But as the days went on, I couldn't deny that there was something there. It was in the way his hand would brush against mine, when we passed in the hallway, the way he would look at me, when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It was subtle but undeniable. And I found myself wondering, where would this lead? We sat there for a long time, the weight of what had just happened settling in. The room was quiet, except for the think hum of the TV. But inside my mind was racing. I had just crossed a line I never thought I'd even approach. But there was no going back now. Alex was still holding me, his hand resting gently on my waist. And I found myself leaning into him, feeling a strange sense of comfort and guilt, all at once. What now? I finally whispered. More to myself than him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted slightly, turning to face me fully. His eyes held the seriousness that made my heart race. We take it one step at a time, he said quietly. I don't want to rush anything. I care about you, Mara. More than I probably should. The honesty in his voice hit me hard. It was surreal, hearing this from someone so much younger, from someone who was supposed to be part of my past. Not my future, but there it was. This undeniable connection that we both felt, but had no idea how to navigate. I care about you too, I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. But this is complicated, Alex, so much more complicated than either of us might realize. I know, he said softly. I get that. But we don't have to figure out everything right now. We can just take it slow. I nodded, trying to process everything. My rational mind was screaming at me to stop, to push him away and set boundaries. But another part of me, the part that had been buried under years of loneliness and grief, was telling me something different. It was telling me that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to feel something again. Even if it was unconventional, even if it was messy. For the next few days, things were different. We didn't talk about the kiss, but the energy between us had shifted. There was a quiet understanding, an unspoken agreement that something had begun. And we were both tiptoeing around it, not wanting to break the fragile balance we had created. One evening, a week later, Alex came home from a job interview, a grin on his face. I think it went well, he said, dropping his bag by the door. They seemed interested. I'll know by the end of the week. That's great, I replied, genuinely happy for him. We spent the evening in the living room talking, laughing, falling into an easy rhythm that felt more natural than I had expected. As the night wore on, I found myself watching him more closely, noticing little things: his laugh, the way he absent-mindedly ruffled his hair, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at me. It was strange feeling this pulled toward him. But at the same time, it felt right. Later, as I was heading upstairs to bed, Alex called after me. Mara. I stopped on the stairs, turning to look at him. He was standing at the base of the steps, his hands in his pockets, an uncertain look on his face. Yeah, I asked, my heart pounding. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. His voice was soft. You've been there for me in ways I didn't expect. And I don't want to mess things up between us. I smiled gently, though there was not tightening in my chest. You're not messing anything up, Alex. We're both just figuring things out. He nodded, his eyes searching blind, Good night, Mara. Good night, Alex. As I lay in bed that night staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how much it changed. In such a short time, the house felt different with him in it. More alive, more complicated. But also more fulfilling weeks passed. And we continued to dance around this delicate balance. There were moments when the tension between us would rise, when our hands would brush, or we'd sit a little too close on the couch. We never talked about it. We both knew something had shifted, but neither of us was quite ready to take that next step. One night after Alex had officially landed his job, we decided to celebrate. We ordered takeout, opened the bottle of wine, and spent the evening talking about his future, his plans and his excitement for what was to come. But as the night wore on, and the wine loosened our inhibitions, the conversation drifted to us. To that night in the kitchen, to the kiss. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, Alex admitted, his voice low. His eyes locked on mine. About you. I swallowed hard, the knot in my chest tightening. Neither have I whispered. He reached out, then taking my hand in his thumb brushing softly against my skin. I know this is complicated, he said quietly, but I don't care. I just want to be with you. My heart was racing, my mind screaming at me to stop, to think about the consequences. But in that moment, all I could think about was him. About the way he made me feel alive again, about the connection we had that seemed to defy reason. I want that too, I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. And with that, the last of my resistance crumbled. We leaned into each other, our lips meeting in a kiss filled with all the longing, all the desire we had been holding back for so long. This time there was no hesitation, no pulling away. That night everything changed between us. We crossed a line that we both knew we couldn't uncross. But neither of us wanted to. It was messy, complicated, and completely unexpected. But it was also real. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. As we lay together, the weight of the world momentarily lifted. I realized that life doesn't always follow the rules. Sometimes, it throws you into situations you never imagined, with people you never expected. And sometimes you just have to let yourself feel. Even if it's complicated, even if it's not what you thought your life would look like. Because in the end, life is short, and maybe, just maybe, happiness doesn't always come in the way you think it will,